Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Enggar Bagas Dewantara. So today I will give my statement for supporting the death penalty. As we have known, death penalty or capital punishment is a punishment given by a court of law for very serious crimes. Death penalty has been applied by many countries. It is estimated over 60% of world population live in the countries where death penalties are retained. So the reason why those countries are still retain death penalties and why death penalty is still popular, because the first is it gives the victims justice. So it gives justice to the victims, and also the second is it gives justice to the victim's family. In this case, the deeds of the perpetrator to the victims is undeniably evil and unforgivable in the sense of morality and also the casualties that are received by the victims. So for instance, in Indonesia, the penalty is eligible to conduct. It is eligible to conduct for serious crimes such as terrorism, murder, drug trafficking, and etc. And also the percentage of death penalty in Indonesia itself also low. The data or the facts that recorded around from 1979 to 2020, there have been 173 cases, and also there are 210 defendants. And around 86% of the cases is related to drug trafficking. The campaign to give death penalty for drug trafficker are being applied in President Jokowi era. And of course, most government officials, institutions, and even from the citizens support this campaign in order to eradicate the source of narcotics. One of the efforts of this campaign is through National Anti-Narcotics Agency, or we call it BNN. BNN instructed to all of the national components to apply and support of the implementation of a national action plan for the prevention and eradication of narcotics abuse and illicit trafficking. Thus, we can conclude that Indonesia itself support the death penalty for drug trafficking. There are also, of course, there are also numerous advantages if death penalty are being applied. The first is, for example, it will give shock therapy for the criminals. So the criminals, it will prevent the criminals to commit a crime, especially for the drug trafficker. Then, second is it will give high deterrent effects for the criminals, so they're likely to commit a crime. So it will prevent the other transgression acts being committed. And as we have all known, the drug traffickers are considered the criminals that commit serious crimes and give many negative impacts to the millions of Indonesia citizens, especially young generation. Thus, it is important to apply that penalty to drug traffickers because it give they give the negative impacts to millions of Indonesian citizens, especially in this case, the young generation that uh, are that have easy ways to get the drugs that are being given to them. So we can conclude that this house support that the death penalty should be applied, especially for drug trafficking in Indonesia. And also and also we support the long-term consequence of the application of the death penalty in Indonesia, because it's really important to apply this, especially for drug trafficking, in order to eradicate the source of narcotics and all of the drug traffickings that are being watched. That's all from me. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Anisa Ananda. I'm the first speaker of the opposition team. Our motion today is this House supports the death penalty. As the first speaker, I do not agree with this motion because the death penalty is the heaviest criminal sentence imposed on a person for his action that require the death of a person. Humans' life will be determined by their own actions. So any action taken by anyone without exception will be regulated and faced with the law. In material criminal law, KUHP, it is regulated that there are basic crimes such as death penalty, imprisonment, confinement, fines, and closure fine. The type of life imprisonment, as regulated in Article 12, Paragraph 1 of the Criminal Code, is often a choice for judges' consideration as an alternative to the death penalty. The reason for life imprisonment as an alternative to criminal is because, first, the death penalty is contrary to the Constitution and international human rights law. The death penalty is a form of bad punishment, cruel and burdening human dignity. This punishment also provides mental and physical torture to the prisoner. So, this punishment violates the right to life. A number of provisions of national constitution, such as 1945 Constitution and Law Number 39, 1999 on human rights, it expressly stated that the right to life is a human right that cannot be reduced anyway. And in Law Number 12, 2005, which in Article 6, Paragraph 1, emphasizes the right to life is a right that is inherent to every individual, regardless of differences in citizenship status. So, human rights are prioritized in Indonesia and apply to all crimes, including drug trafficking. So whatever the type of crime, the form of punishment must be free from all forms of torture or treatment that degrade human dignity. Second, the death penalty is carried out causing a deterrent effect. Unfortunately, the deterrent effect caused by the death penalty is only a myth. According to a comprehensive survey conducted by the United Nations in 1988 and 1996, found the fact that there is no scientific evidence showing that the execution of the death penalty has a greater deterrent effect than life imprisonment. And at the OHCHR event on abolishing the death penalty 2012 even said that the reason for the deterrent effect was something that had been exaggerated over the last few decades. Thus, the solution is the death penalty can be changed with more humane justice system, which is life imprisonment with a fine in accordance with applicable regulations. Because during the detention period, the prisoners can be reviewed again whether the defendant has actually committed an extraordinary crime or not. Maladministration incidents often occur due to lack of evidence. So, the defendant who should not have been sentenced to death is carried out. If the defendant has already have been executed and it is not proven to have committed an extraordinary crime, then this should be a benchmark for the government not to apply the death penalty to prisoners because many considerations that must be seen from all aspects and various sides. So it is better to abolish the death penalty because even if we analyze that the death penalty is not very effective in its application and should be replaced with a life imprisonment and a fine according to applicable regulation, where this penalty is also quite effective and to prevent mistakes in an indictment that often occurs in so as not to it happens that people who are in fact innocent turn out to be charged with the death penalty and end up with the death penalty, which is very unfair to inmate. So I reiterate once again, I'm the first speaker of the opposition team. I don't approve if the death penalty being applied in Indonesia because human rights are highly prioritized and protected in Indonesia. So replacing the death penalty with life imprisonment with a fine according to applicable regulation is an effective solution. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Intan Yuliana Usmandari. I'm speaker to form government team. The death penalty is a sentence handed down by a court to someone, which is the heaviest form of punishment for what has been done. The death penalty in Indonesia is included as the main criminal formulation contained in Article 10 of the Criminal Code. In the RKUHP, the death penalty is still included in the main but special punishment, which is threatened with alternatives. This renewal of the death penalty in the RKUHP is to make the death penalty a special punishment contained in Article 67 of the RKUHP. The inclusion of the death penalty in a separate article shows that this type of crime is truly special. It should be underlined that the purpose of punishment is coaching, not for retaliation. Therefore, the reason the death penalty is re-included in the RKUHP apart from the death penalty is a middle ground for retentionists and abolitionists is the belief that the death penalty has a deterrent effect. The death penalty itself is one of the types of crimes contained in the criminal code, which is the heaviest principal crime. Judging from the history of punishment, that the death penalty was born together with the birth of humans on this earth. With a legal culture of retaliation, like wolves eat wolves. At the time, the crime was based on the theory of absolute retaliation. The specificity of the death penalty is that the death penalty has not yet been replaced with other types of punishment. It can be estimated that if the death penalty could be replaced with another type of punishment of the same severity, there will be no problem. The death penalty is a means to protect the public interest of a social nature, which is endangered by crimes and criminals that cannot be repaired. By the development of the modern criminal laws, composed criminals acts to protect the interests of the community and the interests of individuals who are victims of crimes and criminals. Various methods have been practiced in the context of carrying out the death penalty, ranging from methods that are very scary and hairy to human ways. For example, by giving a poison injection into the convict's body so that without feeling and suffering from pain, the convict breathed his last. In the explanation of our criminal code, it is stated that the death penalty is still needed for several reasons, among others, because of special circumstances, namely the danger of disturbance to law and order. Another reason is that our territory is large and the population consists of several types of groups that can easily clash, while the police tools are not so strong and so on. The death penalty still needs to be maintained in Indonesia because it is for the protection of society to prevent serious crimes for the sake of justice and the unity of Indonesia. In positive criminal law, the death penalty is the main type of crime that is substantively hierarchical as the heaviest criminal sanction. narcotics crime, for one, is considered a serious and extraordinary crime. The determination is based on Law Number 35 of 2009, which emphasized that the punishment for serious strike offenders the death penalty. Defenders of the death penalty say that the death penalty is more certain and specific than imprisonment because imprisonment is often accompanied by the possibility of the convict running away or receiving a pardon or because of acquittal. In this case, some time ago, it was found that 7 inmates were still languishing in prison as suspects in drugs trafficking cases. This was proven when the prison authorities found the evidence and immediately coordinated with the police for a more in-depth disclosure. For the example of cases that I have presented, the death penalty has the role of ensuring that the criminal will not move again and the public will not disturb anymore. And there is no need to be afraid of the crime because his body has been buried, and the criminal will no longer be able to carry out the acts that are wrong with him. I feel, as well as other people, will be afraid to do evil deeds which are punishable with the death penalty. Also, there is an increase the quality and quantity of crime from time to time. So criminals who are increasingly violent need to be given shock therapy in the form of capital punishment, especially for certain criminals who can no longer be expected to change. And to provide legal certainty and ensure a sense of justice from the community. The implementation of the death penalty must be carried out following Law Number 2, 1964. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Nafisah Intan Hasanah as the second speaker of the opposition team. Enforcing the previous points by our first speakers, I'm adding why the death penalty is better abolished. First, human rights activists and defenders consider that the death penalty is contrary to UUD 28E, paragraph 1 of the 45 Second Amendment Constitution, which states that the right to life is human right that cannot be reduced under any circumstances. This means that all forms of law that still include the death penalty as the criminal threat must be changed. The President is considered to have no reason to oppose the provisions of the Constitution. Then, what is the relationship between the human rights and the death penalty? Human rights are one of the rights that are essentially owned by every human being, namely the right to life. The death penalty is not in line with the concept of human rights. If you look at other types of punishment, such as imprisonment, for example, a person's freedom to do something is restrained, but the right to life and other basic rights are still and must be protected. Second, many people agree with the death penalty using the reason that can have a deterrent effect, such as drug dealers, for example. That crimes are considered as extraordinary crimes or crimes that have resulted in the loss of many lives. If it's so, if the benchmark is the number of people who died, should the vehicle seller to be sentenced to death? If it's so, if the benchmark is the number of people who died, so the vehicle seller be sentenced to death as well? How many people died from driving? Hundreds or even thousands of people every year. Does that mean that the vehicle seller should be excluded for this incident? No, it's not right. Drawing conclusion from the United Nations study on the relationship between capital punishment and homicide rates between 1988 to 2002, the death penalty does not have any effect on narcotic trafficking crimes. Then, through the chairman of the National Human Rights Commission, Nurholis, when conveying the conclusion of hearing meeting with the Foundation for International Human Rights Reporting Standards (FIHRRST), state that the implementation of death penalty for convicts of drug cases has not been proven to reduce the number of narcotic abuse. Based on data from BNN, the founder of FIHRRST, Marzuki Darusman, drug users in Indonesia actually increased after the execution of the death penalty process in Indonesia in 2014. From June to November, there was an increase in the number of drug users by 40.5%, from 4.2 million people to 5.9 million drug users. Once again, the increasement in drug-related crimes is not solely caused by the absence of the death penalty, but by other structural problems such as poverty or corrupt law enforcement officials. Even for terrorism crimes, the death penalty is generally a factor that reinforces the repetition of action in the future. The death penalty has become ideological ammunition to increase the radicalism and militancy of the perpetrators. Finally, the death penalty is the most fundamental type of human rights violation, namely the right to life. Fundamental rights or non-derogable rights are types of rights that cannot be violated, reduced, or even restricted under any circumstances. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Muchlisa. In my opinion, the death penalty is good for inmates who commit major crimes such as drug kingpins, because this is one form of law enforcement that is appropriate for them. And also, this can create a deterrent effect so that anyone who wants to do this action can think more than twice to do that. So, in this case, also the punishment given was fair enough because it harmed many parties, which must have been very detrimental to the state, so that it really had to be eradicated. With the imposition of the death penalty for drug offenders, can eradicate the drugs trafficking in Indonesia. Considering that imprisonment, it is no longer very effective, and it opens up opportunity for convict to become a recidivist or even controlling the narcotics business within correctional institution, as expected cases committed by death row inmates Freddy Budiman. The death penalty is considered have greatest abilities to create fear among potential criminals in society when compared to other punishment, especially life imprisonment. Therefore, the criminal penalty death is considered to be a deterrent effect of drug offenders. Different from trend showing that more than half the world country have abolished death penalty, as well as UN recommendation 2007 calling for a moratorium execution of the death penalty. But currently, Indonesia is one of the countries that still maintain the death penalty is the system positive law. Death penalty, setting as a principal crime, contained the book of criminal law (KUHP), while the death penalty for dealers and narcotics producers are regulated in Law Number 5 of 1997 concerning psychotherapy, and the Law Number 2 of 1997 concerning narcotics, which was updated through Law number 35, 2009 on narcotics. In order law enforcement that has been regulated by Law number 2, PNPS 1964 regarding criminal procedures that, among other things, starting that the criminal death imposed by the courts must be executed by shooting. However, there are still opportunities for death row to use all their rights, both ordinary legal remedies and extraordinary legal remedy, to request a leniency of the sentence. Then, the death penalty remains needed for drug cases in order to provide a deterrent effect to the perpetrator's crime, prevent the effect similar punishment by others, satisfying society, preventing violation that getting worse, and breaking the drug chain. Smugglers, suppliers, and seller drugs are considered a class criminal heavy and cause millions of people in Indonesia, including the younger generation, is easy access drug and become victim negative effect of drugs. Therefore, the perpetrators of drug crimes are considered to have been very detrimental to various parties. Okay, this is my opinion. Thank you for your attention.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'm Gharini Rahmadhani from the last speaker from opposition teams. Well, there are many pros and cons regarding the death penalty that still exists in Indonesia. We are a group that believes that the death penalty should not exist and be applied in Indonesia. We have several arguments why the death penalty should not exist in Indonesia. Every person in every country is a human being who has human rights. There are a number of wrong sentences related to the death penalty. Judge and law enforcement are not necessarily fair. It costs a lot of money for a death sentence and inhumane method of death. First, every person in every country is a human being who has human rights. Moreover, there is a paradigm that considers that the application of the death penalty is very much against the principle of human rights. The right to life is the most basic right, and no one has the authority to infringe with or even eliminate it. The right to life is a basic right that is directly attached to every human being and is the most basic given by the Creator. Second, there is an alarming number of false beliefs associated with the death penalty. According to the sources, Save Lives and Money, The Economist, March 12, 2009, assessed June 5, 2011, it is recorded that around 113 people were released from the death penalty. In the process from arrest to the action he committed are two savers if he sentences to death and if is in nonsense or mere misunderstanding which is declared valid by judge, then defendants can be released from the death penalty. Third, judge and law enforcement are not necessarily fair. During the trial, several members of the prosecutor's family wanted their wishes granted by judge. It is often found that several parties from various levels of the prosecutor's office give briefs, which make judges and other law enforcers act unfairly and dishonestly, such as denying evidence of innocence, giving an inappropriate sentence, and using territorial reasons such as patching and the victims or prosecutors. The injustice that occurred was considered burdensome to the defendants by being sentenced to heavy penalties and fines and even the death penalty. Fourth, to spend a lot of money one of death sentence, as mentioned earlier, the process of achieving the death penalty is a long road with various trials. According to legal basic articles, 2 regulation of the Supreme Court of the Republic Indonesia, numbers 3 of the 2012 that's 10 April 2012 one general session in Indonesia cost around 150 with details of 50 for each case, not only on trial continuously, not to mention the execution of the death penalty that requires funds, so the cost will exceed the calculation. Lastly, the inhuman way of dying in historical records, there have been several inhuman deaths with the death penalty. The most painful part is the use of the electric chair, which may seem commonplace, but in some states, the death penalty by electric chairs were witnessed by the family of the plaintiff or victims. Convict Ellen Lee Tini Davis, who weighs 156 kilograms, even screamed in pain with blood dripping down his shirt during his electric chair execution in Florida, 1998. The blood came out Davis' nose. The death penalty is not a suitable punishment anywhere. Besides being inhuman, it can also embrace the dependent, his family, and even his children. In conclusion, the death penalty should not be imposed in Indonesia or in any other country. This is because every person in every country is a human being who has human rights. There is an alarming number of the death sentence related to the death penalty. Judge and law enforcement are not necessarily fair, spending a lot of money, one death penalty, and inhuman ways of dying as a result. The death penalty should not be enforced. And I think that's all. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you so much for the speech of the government and also the opposition side. So I am, as the first speaker of the government side, will give the reply speech for our statement that we are supporting the death penalty. So we can conclude that based on the statement that were given by both sides, death penalty is still need to be applied. If there is a statement said that death penalty is not effective, it is not correct, because in President Jokowi's era, death penalty has been applied 2 times in the first years of his office. The fact that the decrease of drug trafficking activity is due to the application of death penalty. Then the fact that the defendant still has the right to hire lawyers, give statement that will lower his conviction, it proves that the penalty is being applied according to the law. Thus, once again, as the government side, we support the application of death penalty for drug traffickers in Indonesia. Thank you so much.
Okay, I'm going to read the reply speech from opposition team. Once again, I strongly disagree with the motion in favor of the death penalty because, first, the death penalty should not be applied in Indonesia because we have the human rights. Second, the worrying thing about the death penalty is that judges and law enforcement are not necessarily fair, spending a lot of money on one death sentence. Third, the process of implementing the death penalty is inhuman in our opinion. Thank you very much. And I want to add some points. For controversy, it's controversy to human rights or harm. And 5, the last, the death penalty is not in line with human rights because it shows inhuman way of the execution. Thank you very much.